The call came in just after midnight. I'd been catching some shut-eye in the barracks when the klaxon jolted me awake. As I stumbled out of my bunk, I could already hear the thunder of footsteps in the hallway. Something big was going down. I'm Jack Hawkins, Coast Guard rescue team member. Growing up in St. Mary's Home for Boys, I never thought I'd end up here. But life has a way of steering you where you're meant to be. The Coast Guard became my family, my purpose. Every life saved was a reminder of why I put on this uniform. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for us in the briefing room, his face grave. "We've got a situation, people," he said, gesturing to a satellite image on the screen behind him. The Elias oil rig, 200 miles off the coast. They'd gone dark. No radio contact for the past 48 hours. Satellite imaging shows no signs of life or activity. A murmur rippled through the room. I exchanged glances with my partner, Marcus. We'd seen our share of weird stuff out on the water, but this felt different. The captain continued, "We don't know what we're dealing with here. Could be a technical malfunction, could be pirates. Hell, for all we know, they hit an unknown gas pocket. Your job is to get out there, assess the situation, and bring back any survivors." As the briefing wrapped up, I felt that familiar mix of adrenaline and anxiety coursing through my veins. This was what we trained for, but something about this mission set my teeth on edge. I pushed the feeling aside as Marcus and I geared up. Our team consisted of 4, Marcus and me on the ground, with Ryan piloting and Derek as our flight engineer. As we lifted off from base, the first rays of dawn were just starting to paint the horizon. The ocean stretched out beneath us, vast and unforgiving. I couldn't help but think of all the souls we'd pulled from those waters over the years. How many were waiting for us on the Elias? We made a pit stop at a U.S. destroyer for refueling. As Derek topped off our tanks, I found myself staring out at the endless expanse of water. It always amazed me how something so beautiful could be so deadly. I thought back to my first rescue mission, the fear and exhilaration as I dove into those choppy waves. The orphanage seemed a lifetime ago. "Penny for your thoughts, Hawkins." Marcus's voice pulled me back to the present. I turned to see him grinning, that cocky smile that had gotten us through more than a few hairy situations. "Just wondering what we're flying into," I admitted. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "Whatever it is, we got this. Best swimmer, best shot in the guard right here," he said, pointing at me. "And me. I'm just here to make you look good." I couldn't help but laugh. That was Marcus, always ready with a quip to lighten the mood. But as we climbed back into the chopper, I could see the tension in his eyes. He felt it too. This wasn't going to be a routine rescue. As we approached the coordinates of the Elias, an eerie fog began to roll in. Ryan's voice crackled over the comms. "Visibility dropping fast, guys. Keep your eyes peeled." I pressed my face to the window, straining to catch a glimpse of the rig through the murk. Suddenly, a dark shape loomed out of the fog. "There!" I shouted, pointing. The Elias materialized before us, a hulking metal giant rising from the mists. As Ryan brought us in closer, I could make out an H-225 Airbus helicopter on the rig's helipad, its propellers turning lazily in the wind. It was an unsettling sight, a sign of life, but one that spoke of sudden abandonment. "All right, boys," Ryan's voice came through again. "I can't set her down in this soup. You're going to have to fast rope it." Marcus and I shared a nod. Our game faces on. This was it. As the side doors slid open and the rope unfurled, I took a deep breath. Whatever was waiting for us on that rig, we were about to find out. With one last look at Marcus, I grabbed the rope and descended into the unknown. The moment my boots hit the deck of the Elias, I knew something was terribly wrong. The metal beneath my feet vibrated with an eerie silence, as if the very heart of the rig had stopped beating. Marcus landed beside me with a soft thud, his eyes already scanning our surroundings. The fog clung to us like a second skin, muffling the sound of Ryan's helicopter as it hovered overhead. "Jack," Marcus Comms check. Ryan's voice crackled in my ear. I gave a thumbs up, more for Marcus's benefit than Ryan's. We're good, I replied. Beginning sweep of the upper deck. With a nod to Marcus, we started our search, moving in perfect sync. A dance we perfected over countless missions. The first signs of trouble were subtle. A wrench lay abandoned mid-task, rust already starting to form on its silver surface. A half-empty coffee mug sat on a nearby railing, its contents now a moldy science experiment. It was as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their day. I've seen my share of deserted vessels, but this felt different. As we made our way towards the living quarters, the wrongness of it all kept building. The dining area was a snapshot of interrupted life. Trays of food left to rot, chairs askew as if their occupants had fled in a hurry. The smell hit us like a wall, a noxious mix of decay and something else I couldn't quite place. Marcus gagged beside me, and I didn't blame him. I've smelled death before, but this was something altogether more foul. Ryan, Derek, I spoke into my comm. We're not finding any signs of life up here. No signs of struggle either. It's like everyone just left. There was a pause before Ryan's reply came through, tinged with static and unease. Copy that. Any clues as to what might have happened? I was about to respond when Marcus called out from across the room. Jack, you need to see this. His voice had a tremor I'd never heard before, and it sent a chill down my spine. I made my way over to where he stood, frozen in the doorway of what looked like a storage closet. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the interior, and I felt my stomach lurch. Inside was a body, or what was left of one. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in all my years with the Coast Guard. The corpse was twisted in ways a human body shouldn't bend, its skin a mottled gray. But it was the wounds that caught my attention. Deep, ragged gashes that looked like bite marks. And the body seemed desiccated, as if every drop of fluid had been drained from it. Holy shit, I breathed, struggling to keep my composure. Marcus was already radioing it in, his voice shaky but professional. Ryan, we found a body. It's bad. Signs of violence, but unlike anything we've seen before. Possible animal attack. But he trailed off, unable to put into words the horror before us. I forced myself to take a closer look, years of training kicking in despite the revulsion churning in my gut. The bite marks were huge, far larger than any shark or other marine predator I knew of. And there was something else, a strange residue around the wounds that seemed to shimmer in the beam of my flashlight. As we continued our search, we found more bodies, each in a similar state. The rig had become a charnel house, and with each gruesome discovery, the weight of our situation pressed down on us. Whatever had happened here, it was far beyond the scope of anything we'd been trained for. We were making our way down to the lower levels when I heard it, a sound so beautiful and so out of place that at first I thought I must be imagining things. It was singing, a melody so haunting and ethereal that it seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my soul. I turned to Marcus to ask if he heard it too, but the words died in my throat. Marcus stood transfixed, his eyes glazed over, swaying slightly as if in a trance. The singing grew louder, and I felt an overwhelming urge to follow it, to find its source. But years of training and a deep-seated instinct for survival kept me rooted to the spot. Marcus, I hissed, shaking his shoulder. Marcus, snap out of it. But he was beyond hearing me. As if in a dream, Marcus began to walk towards the sound, his movements jerky and unnatural. I grabbed his arm, trying to hold him back, but he shook me off with strength born of whatever spell had taken hold of him. And then I saw her. At the end of the dimly lit corridor stood the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Her long, dark hair seemed to float around her as if she were underwater, and her eyes were like the depths of the ocean, drawing me in. For a moment, I felt myself slipping, the siren song threatening to overwhelm my senses. But then she smiled, and in that smile, I saw rows of razor-sharp teeth, inhuman and terrifying. The illusion shattered, and before my eyes, the beautiful woman transformed into a creature of nightmare, scales gleaming wetly in the low light, claws where hands should be, and those terrible, terrible teeth. I had just enough time to shout a warning to Marcus before the creature lunged at us, moving with impossible speed. In that moment, as I reached for my weapon and braced for impact, I realized that we had stumbled into something far beyond pirates or gas leaks. We were facing a threat that shouldn't exist outside of myths and legends, and I had no idea if we would make it out alive. Time seemed to slow as the creature lunged at us. I faced down storms that could swallow ships whole, but nothing had prepared me for this. My training kicked in on pure instinct, and I shoved Marcus hard, sending him stumbling backwards just as those razor-sharp claws sliced through the air where he'd been standing. "Marcus, snap out of it," I yelled, drawing my sidearm in one fluid motion. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the corridor, but it did the trick. Marcus's eyes cleared, the spell broken by the sudden violence. The creature, I couldn't bring myself to call it a woman anymore, let out an inhuman shriek that set my teeth on edge. "What the hell is that thing?" Marcus gasped, scrambling to his feet and drawing his own weapon. I didn't have an answer for him. The creature circled us, moving with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Its eyes, no longer alluring but predatory, darted between us as if deciding which one to take first. "Ryan, Derek, we need immediate evac." I barked into my comm. "We've encountered hostile entities, unknown classification, extremely dangerous." Static was my only answer. Whether it was the rig's structure or something more sinister, our comms were down. We were on our own. The realization must have shown on my face, because Marcus met my eyes with a grim nod. We'd been in tough spots before, but this was something else entirely. "Back to the helipad?" he asked, voice steady despite the fear I knew he must be feeling. I nodded. It was our only shot. As if sensing our plan, the creature attacked again. This time, Marcus was ready. He fired, the muzzle flash illuminating the corridor in stark relief. The bullet struck the creature's shoulder, and to our horror, the wound seemed to close almost instantly. But it bought us a precious few seconds. "Run," I shouted, and we took off down the corridor. The sound of claws scraping metal followed close behind, spurring us on faster than I thought possible. We burst through a door into what looked like a control room, slamming it shut behind us. The metal buckled almost immediately as the creature threw itself against it. "Help me with this." Marcus was already shoving a heavy desk towards the door. Together, we managed to barricade it, but we both knew it wouldn't hold for long. The room was a dead end. We'd have to find another way out. As I scanned our surroundings for options, a flash of movement outside the window caught my eye. More of them. At least 3, maybe 4 of the creatures were scaling the side of the rig, moving with impossible speed and agility. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We weren't dealing with a single monster, but an entire pack of them. "We've got company," I warned Marcus, gesturing to the window. He cursed, a sentiment I wholeheartedly agreed with. The barricaded door was already starting to give way, the metal groaning in protest. "There." Marcus pointed to a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. It was a long shot, but it was the only option we had. I gave Marcus a boost, watching anxiously as he wrestled with the hatch. The sound of tearing metal behind us grew louder. Come on," I muttered, dividing my attention between Marcus and the failing door. With a triumphant grunt, Marcus finally got the hatch open and pulled himself up. Just as he reached down to help me, the barricade gave way. The creature burst into the room, its beautiful features now fully transformed into something out of a nightmare. I leaped, grabbing Marcus's hand as the monster's claws raked the air where I'd been standing a split second before. With a strength born of desperation, Marcus hauled me up through the hatch. We slammed it shut, but there was no way to secure it from our side. "Move," I urged, and we took off down the narrow maintenance tunnel. The sound of the hatch being torn open echoed behind us, along with that bone-chilling shriek. We emerged onto an upper deck, the wind whipping at us with sudden fury. A storm had rolled in while we were inside, and rain lashed at us, turning the metal deck treacherously slick. Through the downpour, I could make out the shape of the helipad. Our salvation was tantalizingly close, but the space between us, and it was open, exposed. As if the universe wanted to emphasize just how screwed we were, a bolt of lightning illuminated the scene. In that brief, brilliant flash, I saw them, at least a dozen of the creatures, emerging from various points around the rig. We were surrounded. "Jack," Marcus's voice was barely audible over the howling wind. "I don't think we're both making it out of here." The resignation in his tone cut me deeper than any of those creatures' claws could. I wanted to argue, to tell him we'd face this together, like we always had. But one look at the approaching horde, and I knew he was right. "I'll draw them off," he continued, checking his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "You make a run for the helipad." I shook my head, unwilling to accept what he was proposing. "No way in hell am I leaving you behind," I growled, but even as I said it, I knew it was our only shot. Marcus grinned at me, that same cocky smile he'd worn a lifetime ago when we'd set out on this mission. "Hey, somebody's got to make you look good, right?" And before I could stop him, he took off running, firing his weapon and shouting to draw the creature's attention. It worked. Most of the pack peeled off to chase Marcus, leaving me a narrow window of opportunity. Every instinct screamed at me to go after him, to have his back like I always had. But I knew that would mean both our deaths. With a silent prayer for my partner, I ran. The helipad seemed miles away, each step on the rain-slicked deck a battle against both the elements and my own exhaustion. I could hear the creatures behind me, their inhuman shrieks carried on the wind. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in protest, but I didn't dare slow down. I was almost there when I heard it. Marcus's scream, cut terrifyingly short. I faltered, nearly losing my footing as the sound tore through me. In that moment of hesitation, I felt claws rake across my back, tearing through my uniform and into flesh. The pain was immediate and intense, but it spurred me on with renewed desperation. With one final burst of speed, I hurled myself onto the helipad. Ryan, bless him, had been hovering nearby despite the storm. The moment he saw me, he brought the chopper in low. I could see the shock on his and Derek's faces as they took in my battered appearance and the nightmare scene unfolding behind me. As I reached for the outstretched hand Derek offered, I risked one last glance back. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. The creatures swarmed over the spot where I'd last heard Marcus, a writhing mass of scales and teeth. And beyond them, more were coming, climbing up the sides of the rig like a tide of living nightmares. With a final surge of strength, I grabbed Derek's hand and pulled myself into the helicopter. "Go, go, go," I shouted, and Ryan didn't need to be told twice. As we lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of the Elias through the rain-streaked window. It stood alone in the churning sea, a monument to horrors that shouldn't exist in this world. As the rig faded into the storm behind us, I slumped against the wall of the chopper, the adrenaline finally giving way to the pain of my injuries and the crushing weight of what we'd just experienced. Marcus was gone. My partner, my friend, had sacrificed himself so I could escape. And for what? To bring back a story so incredible, so terrifying, that I wasn't sure anyone would believe it. But as I sat there, blood seeping through my torn uniform and the sound of the storm giving way to the steady thrum of the helicopter's blades, I made a silent vow. I would make sure Marcus's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Whatever those creatures were, wherever they came from, I would find a way to stop them. The world needed to know what lurked in the shadows of the sea, and I was now the only one left to tell the tale. The days following our return from the Elias blurred together in a haze of debriefings. medical examinations, and sleepless nights. I replayed the events on the rig over and over in my mind, searching for some detail I might have missed, some explanation that would make sense of the nightmare we'd encountered. But no matter how I looked at it, the truth remained horrifyingly clear. We had faced something that shouldn't exist. The official story was already being crafted by the time we touched down at base. Gas leak, they said. Mass hallucinations, the bodies we found. Victims of some unidentified toxin that had driven the rig's crew to turn on each other. I wanted to scream, to shake them and make them understand the truth. But the words caught in my throat every time I tried to describe what we'd seen. Ryan and Derek, to their credit, backed up my account as best they could. But they hadn't seen what Marcus and I had seen. They hadn't felt the hypnotic pull of that siren song, or face-down creatures with teeth that could tear through metal. And Marcus wasn't here to corroborate anything. The loss of my partner hit me harder than any physical wound. In quiet moments, I found myself turning to share a thought or a joke, only to be met with empty space. The Coast Guard offered counseling, of course. Mandatory sessions with well-meaning therapists who nodded sympathetically as I danced around the truth, unable to fully articulate the horrors we faced without sounding completely unhinged. It was during one of these sessions, about a week after our return, that everything changed. I was in the middle of another carefully sanitized retelling of events when there was a knock at the door. The therapist looked surprised, then slightly annoyed as a man in a crisp suit entered without waiting for a response. "I'm afraid I'll have to cut this session short," the newcomer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to me, extending a hand. "Jack Hawkins, Agent Collins, I need you to come with me." The therapist started to protest, but Collins silenced her with a look and a flash of some kind of badge. Before I knew it, I was being led out of the building and into a waiting car with tinted windows. As we pulled away from the base, I finally found my voice. "What's this about?" I demanded. Collins regarded me for a long moment before speaking. "What you encountered on the Ilias," he said slowly, "was not an isolated incident." My heart rate spiked at his words. This was the first time anyone outside of our team had even hinted at believing what had really happened out there. "We've been tracking similar occurrences for years," Collins continued. "Disappearances at sea, ships found adrift with their crews mysteriously absent, reports of strange creatures that most dismiss as the ramblings of shell-shock survivors." He paused, his eyes boring into mine. "But you saw them up close, didn't you, Mr. Hawkins? You fought them and lived to tell about it." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "What were they?" I managed to ask. Collins's expression darkened. "We call them sirens, for lack of a better term. But they're far from the beautiful mermaids of legend. They're apex predators, ancient and cunning, and they're becoming bolder." The car pulled up to a nondescript office building, and Collins led me inside. As we passed through layers of security that would put most military installations to shame, he continued to speak. "I represent an organization known as the Paranormal Control Unit, or PCU. Our job is to investigate and contain threats that fall outside the realm of conventional explanation." We entered a room that looked like a cross between a high-tech command center and a library. Screens displayed maps dotted with incident reports, while shelves groaned under the weight of ancient-looking tomes. "For centuries, we've managed to keep the existence of creatures like the sirens secret from the general public," Collins explained. "But incidents like what happened on the Ilias are making that increasingly difficult." My head was spinning as I tried to process everything Collins was telling me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as some elaborate hoax, but I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes. I'd seen those creatures, fought them, lost Marcus to them. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked finally. Collins's expression softened slightly. "Because we need people like you, Jack. People who've seen the truth and have the courage to face it. Your background in the Coast Guard, your experience on the Ilias. You're uniquely qualified to help us fight this threat." I stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in. "You're offering me a job," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. Collins nodded. "We can't force you to join us. If you walk away now, you'll be free to return to your life. We'll make sure your superiors understand you've been recruited for a classified operation. You can try to forget what you've seen, what you've learned here." But even as he said it, we both knew that wasn't an option. The memory of Marcus's final scream, of those razor-sharp teeth and hypnotic eyes, was burned into my mind. I couldn't walk away, couldn't pretend that the world was still the simple, explicable place I'd once believed it to be. "If I say yes," I began slowly, "what exactly would I be doing?" Collins gestured to the room around us. "You'd be on the front lines, investigating reports of paranormal activity, particularly those related to maritime incidents. You'd help us track the sirens, understand their patterns, and develop strategies to combat them. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be safe, but it's vital work." I thought about all the lives lost on the Ilias, about Marcus's sacrifice. I thought about all the other incidents Collins had mentioned, the ships found empty, the disappeared crews. How many more would fall victim to these creatures if someone didn't stand against them? "I'm in," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. Collins nodded, a look of respect and perhaps relief crossing his features. "Welcome to the PCU, Agent Hawkins," he said, extending his hand once more. As I shook it, I felt the weight of my decision settling on my shoulders. This was more than just a new job. It was a new reality. As Collins began to brief me on my first assignment, I couldn't help but think of Marcus. I hoped that wherever he was, he'd understand why I couldn't walk away from this fight. The world was full of horrors beyond most people's imagination, but now I had the chance to do something about it. It wouldn't bring Marcus back, wouldn't undo the trauma of what we'd experienced on the Ilias, but maybe, just maybe, it would mean his sacrifice wasn't in vain. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. The life I'd known was over, but a new chapter was beginning. And this time, I'd be ready for whatever nightmares came crawling out of the depths.